Welcome, everybody. With me today is Steve White, recently retired sergeant and trainer with the Seattle Police Department. Steve and I are going to have a conversation on um, what some of the issues are with training dogs in different contexts and how that may appear in the beginning so that everybody's aware of what that really means. So context learning is usually is when you hear it, it's kind of like, yeah, well, my dog really did well when I was working him at home or when I worked him on the training field, but as soon as I took him somewhere else, he didn't perform as well or didn't perform at all, and looks confused as to what I'm asking and requiring them to do. So, Steve, what do you think about that?
Well, dogs are context sensitive learners, Don. People have to remember that like everybody's dog is good in the kitchen. Why? Because you know what? There's always something falling off the cutting board and they can pick up a snack and everything. A lot of people have dogs that are really good in the kitchen. And then what's the room in the house that they're next likely to be good at offering behaviors? Whatever room people sit and watch TV in and have popcorn and things like that, and they fall and they get little treats and people will do little tricks with them. And everything looks fine until the day Aunt Mabel comes by and wants to visit, and you go into the living room, take all the plastic off the couch and all that good stuff and try and show the tricks to her. And the dog looks at you like they don't know what's going on. They go, huh? And that's because that dog hasn't practiced it in that context. It can literally be as small a difference as being in a different room. Um, Marine mammal trainers call it the new tank syndrome. And so they have a training tank and then they have a performance tank, and they have to build the behaviors in the training tank, and then they have to reshape them and re-solidify their stimulus control when they get to the performance tank. And then they have to simulate and have mock audiences and the sounds of crowds and things like that that get in there to prepare the dog. We have to do the same thing with our police dogs. It's that simple. There's no doubt about it. That context sensitive learning is a critical part of what's going on. And behavior analysts will call that context as part of the contingencies that define what learning looks like.
Well, that's a good start, but I was wondering, just exactly what does the dog learn in when they're when one of the handlers is training their dog? What is the dog picking up from that training? What are some of the things that that dog can expect, or you should expect your dog to be learning along with what you're training?
Well, in the very beginning, what you want your dog to learn is the basics of the behavior. So you're going to work in a less stimulating environment, fewer distractions, one where they can focus on you and you can focus on them. And that's going to entail working on the three main elements of fluency, which are accuracy, latency, and speed or power. So accuracy is what the shape, the topography of the behavior looks like. Is that sit, is that sit square on the haunches with the front feet directly underneath the chest, or is it flopped to one side, or is it splayed out forward? Is that down all the way to the ground, or is it hovering, waiting to launch? Things like that. That's accuracy. Latency is the time between when you give a cue and the animal starts the motion, and then speed or power is the speed at which they execute it or the force with which they execute it. A lot of the research that was done about this stuff was done with pigeons and rats in an operant chamber known as a Skinner box, colloquially. But in those things, if you talk to behavior analysts, they describe the likelihood of a behavior occurring. The frequency of the behavior is how you measure whether the behavior is stronger or weak or not. That's because in the Skinner box, speed and power are baked in. The lever can actuate at a certain speed, and it takes a certain amount of force to do it. So if the animal hits it with the right speed at the right time, then that goes ahead and meets the criteria for the behavior being done. Out here, well, we can have a dog that grabs a hold of something with just the slightest bit of its front teeth, or one that grabs with the full mouth and exerts pressure. And so we have to gauge what we want the behavior to look like, how hard we want the dog to do it, and how quickly we want the dog to respond to us when they do it. Those are the first things you're going to work in training. In the training context, you're going to build those in the basic skill building phase. That's what you want to look at. So you got to really have a picture in your mind of what you want that behavior to look like, build it there, then you start working through the other elements that take it to generalization. So you build the behavior, you get it under stimulus control, means when you give the cue to do that behavior, the animal offers you that behavior, no other behavior, and continues to offer that behavior until you give it a cue to do something else, either release it or perform another behavior. That's what stimulus control is. Do what I say and only what I say as soon as I tell you to do it until I tell you to do something else. So at that point, once you've got the animal at the point where they're performing well in the training context with minimal distraction, then you can start adding some things. And probably one of the first things you're going to add in that training environment is duration, how long it lasts, how long that behavior. So, for example, a lot of people, when they start clicker training, are so excited with the fact that they can get quick responses with the dog, with the precision of the clicker to get the animal to drop, that the instant they drop, they'll click and then pay. And then what you get is animals that think, okay, the behavior's just bounce down as quick as I can and then jump up to get my treat. We call that a pop up down. So to to um, to get past that, you have to start shaping for duration, and duration is something that if you look at it, can I share a screen right now?
Of course.
All right. So when we're looking at duration right now, you should see this come up here in a moment. Um, so when you're looking at it, what you want to do is to have your repetition stretch along a vector. You don't want to just make it linear. I'm going to do it for a quarter of a second, then a half a second. Has to lie down for 3/4 of a second, then 1 second, then a second and a half, then 2 seconds, etc. Because if you do that, they're going to get they're going to realize, hey, this is just getting harder. And so you want to keep them guessing. And the way to do that is to work along a vector as opposed to make it a directly increasing effort. So basically, what it's going to look like is the first time out, you're going to go ahead and maybe ask for them to hold it for a half a second, and then maybe another one for a half a second. And then maybe the next one, pardon me, those were a quarter of a second. Now you're at a half a second. Then you're back to a quarter second, back to a half a second. And then as you see, you ping pong and skew your way in the general direction of what you want of increasing duration to get it along there. And if you look at that, now you have a smooth line going up there if you follow the trend line, but you didn't take a smooth path to get there. Keep the dog guessing, and then it keeps it interesting enough for them to be invested in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And so basically, what you're saying, and just about everything that you're going to train the dog to do, you're going to actually go along the same line. You might train them in somewhat of a neutral area, and then take them and start taking them out into, say, more interesting areas with more distractions and such.
Well,
Correct?
that's what comes next. So distractions are another thing. And basically, let's take a look at what a distraction is. Um, a distraction is really basically a competing stimulus. Any stimulus that um, oh, takes your dog's attention away from what you're doing at the time, whether that's healing, the dog's watching a suspect, or whatever. There we go. So if you take a look at this right now, and you look at this, and the dog's over here on this side, the quality of stimuli that you're looking at are volume. That's either how big or small it is, or how loud it is. There's also salience. Now, can you see the dot that's on the screen right there in front of the dog? How
No,
about now?
no,
You see it? Does it show up now?
no. Yes.
And so salience is how much something jumps out of the background, how much we notice it because it differs from what else is around it. It's there. That dot was there from the whole time, from the very beginning. But in the beginning, the shades were so light, we didn't notice it. Dogs will notice contrast as well, like that. So salient, something that jumps out. That's why clickers work so well, because they're salient. They jump out of the background. They're not something that dogs are used to seeing or hearing, or I should say hearing all the time. Proximity. Obviously, there's a difference between a decoy that's out there in the distance or one that's right up on top of the dog. Dogs will consider something at a distance less of a threat or less concerning or less interesting than something that's right up in front of them. Now, that's going to vary from dog to dog, but you got to. Now, vector is a different thing. Vector is the way a stimulus moves, the way it proceeds through the planet that we're on right now. So, in other words, if I have something moving at an angle like that, that is a different thing than something that moves at this angle. For example, if it's another handler with a dog, what's the difference between the two of those? Well, if the dog heels on the left side as conventionally, in this particular instance, what you'll see is that the dog will be closest. So the dog that's heeling will be closest to the dog that's at the sit. Whereas when you're going the other way, the way we went before, the dog is on the other side and is screened by the handler's body. And for some dog, that's enough to make a difference in how significant that dog is. And you can work on your dog distraction problems with that. So, as we go through this, there's also a difference between direct angles and arcs. And little dogs, if you notice them when they greet each other, they greet in arcs. They tend not to run right up. Dogs that run right up are the ones at the dog park or whatever else that wind up getting fights. They may want to be friendly, but they just don't know to take that arcing approach. And so when they run right up, other dogs are like, whoa, ho, 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 you're being a little rude, dude. And so you want to realize that arcing approaches can ease a dog into something, and you'll arc from both directions. You also want to worry about speed, how fast something moves. That approach can make a big difference. Sometimes a fast approach can arouse a dog, but also sometimes when you take that really slow, creepy approach, you'll spin a dog up. And so you want to vary all of those qualities of a stimulus before you move on there. And then you got to decide how long something's going to last. The permanence with which it is in front of the dog is other things, because object permanence is important for a dog, because you can take a dog, show them a cookie, and show them 10 cookies, put them in a box and all that stuff. Then wait 5 seconds, have somebody else show the dog one cookie. Hey, cookie, look at this cookie. Throw that in a box that's 10, 15 feet away from the other one. And 9 times out of 10, the dog is going to go for the second box, the one with only one cookie instead of the one with 10, because quantity doesn't matter to them nearly as much as the temporal proximity is. That's now, that's here. They are creatures of the moment. I saw that cookie. They may then go and investigate and find the other cookies. It's rare you find a dog that will go for that first one that they saw. Usually they go for the thing that they saw later. Okay, so when we're approaching distractions like this, one of the things that we want to realize is that as we look at these things, you've got to train the dog in all 5 senses. You've got to just, operate with distractions that are going to get their attention. These cues, these things that will try to draw them away. So there's, obviously visual stuff is the one that's most common. It's the most significant to us. And it's something that dogs are very distractible, and different breeds are different. You can take, for example, a Belgian Malinois and a bloodhound and present the same thing in front of them, and they'll have 2 completely different responses to whether they're aroused and they want to go investigate or not. And that can be just somebody moving across their field of view. Belgian Malinois tend to have a low sensory threshold for visual stimuli. So it doesn't take much to get them to go, that's interesting. I want to go investigate that. A bloodhound probably wouldn't do that with something that they see quite as easily, but they might with for something they smell. So you take a look at it and figure out what's going on. Now, the next thing you got to consider is sound too. Some dogs are sound sensitive, and you can get dogs past some sound sensitivity, but some of it is probably innate. So you want to make sure that you approach this in a graduated fashion. Don't just flood them with stimuli and expect them to overcome it. You have to go ahead and take the dog and let them see that that the sound isn't going to hurt them. So we start. Well, we're lucky. For example, in Seattle, Even though we have a very small canine center, or we had one there, that canine center was right next to our primary firearms qualification range. So when we get new dogs in, right away, they're exposed to gunfire um, in a setting in which nobody expects anything out of them, and they acclimate to it pretty quickly. Um, and then when we start doing work with them around gunfire, we do it at a distance first with small caliber blanks at a distance, and then we work our way up to live fire at close proximity gradually. Um, and we look for gunfire neutrality. We don't want dogs aggressing on the gunfire. Obviously, that's an old school concept. That's where I started back in the 1970s. And now we know that's a big mistake because dogs will therefore go after somebody that's, friendly fire. You can have a dog engaging in a friendly bite on somebody that they shouldn't, or even their own handlers. I've seen that happen. So sight and sound are two of the most common sensory stimuli that a dog has to encounter, but smell's the most engrossing, and it's the one that really captures them. And if you think about it for human beings too, smell is the sense that will trigger memory more than any other. There's all sorts of research about this, but it's one of those things that we find with dogs. They really get wrapped up in it, and that stuff. Sometimes it's great because when it's the quarry we're after, the suspect that we're tracking, that's what we want. We want that dog engrossed in that smell. But when that trail gets a little lean and they're having a rough time with it, and there's this bush over there that another dog peed on a little while ago, is like, ah, man, that smells so good. Maybe I'll go check that. Next thing you know, your dog is distracted off that. So you have to work at training your dog to resist those distractions. Um, the one that gets the quickest response out of a dog where you see, big changes is touch. Dogs are sensitive to touch. They handle touch in a different way than we do, and they don't like unexpected touches. So they will turn around and respond to those things. So you want to make sure that you acclimate the dog to touch. So, for example, um, one of the things that you'll see in the sport world are stick hits or rattlesticks, where you get both a combination of sound and a physical stimulus. Um, those There's even controversy in the sports now about whether those things should be done because of the ethics involved. But I think for a police dog, you have to acclimate them to physical conflict. So they have to get used to somebody trying to toss them around and things like that. Obviously, we don't want to hurt our dogs, and so we want to do it carefully, but we do have to get them used to the rough and tumble of this. They have to learn to spar, and they have to learn to fight by sparring. And it has to be a real spar where there's real effort and a real attempt to go ahead and see if he can find the dog's limits and let the dog push himself past them. And that's also the limits of control. Taste is very captivating too. And it's one of those things that get on there. So you'll see a dog that will shift from smell to taste pretty quickly. And we don't know how much of these sensitivities to stimuli are built into the dog innately and how much are built through the way their upbringing has been and their environmental factors. And so you can modify some of it, and there are some limitations to the ability to modify it that you can get. And you just got to take the dog you've got and do the best you can with it and see whether that meets your needs.
I have a
I think,
question.
yeah,
I have a
go for it.
question. So when you're starting you're training the training the dog to do something. You're doing it basically in a pretty bland area, no distractions, things like that. And then you start to go from there once they know how to do the exercise or they know how to do the work that they're supposed to do. Do you then start to take them out into different distractions? And how difficult do you make those distractions in the beginning? You just throw them right into something?
No, 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 no. And actually, before we do distractions, we'll do distance because we want to get the dog working at a distance comfortably too, because I think that breeds some independence. And distance has two forms: distance from the handler and distance from the distraction, or distance from the object it's working toward. So, and we want to make the dog feel calm and assured in working at a distance away from the handler, that they have that ability to handle things independently. still under stimulus control, but that they can navigate the stuff that the world throws at them and they can get through this stuff. And we want to make sure that we are able to reinforce them appropriately. So sometimes we'll put in a keep going signal. But the key to this, when it comes to distance work, is what I call the wobble. And wobbling means it's also like the ping ponging and skewing to get duration, where you don't always work at the same distance. You kind of go back and forth. So, for example, when we wobble for distance, essentially, and basically, we're trying to uh, get the angles and curves that we're talking about that we want. You want to get the dog really. Oh, wait a minute. Get the dog really moving through these different aspects of it, and it's important to make sure that you understand that angles and curves and distance affect dogs differently, and each dog's going to have a different way it works for them. Just make sure that you meet that dog at their level. And I think this makes a little more sense. If I were to take this decoy out here and approach this dog and I did a straight line, that would have one effect on the dog. And you might see some dogs when they're young and they're novices, that would be a little too much for them. And so in those instances, maybe we'll take a little sneakier approach like this. And that will wind up giving the dog a little moments of respite and confidence as the guy zigs and zags his way up there. Or we may take a path that's more like this, where it's back and forth and a lot more to give that dog those moments of challenge and then a respite, challenge and a respite, and we go from there. Um, from this, once we get the dog working independently, with the challenge coming at a distance like that or working away from us, we can go ahead and do the other things that we need. So, for example, one of the things we'll do is we'll give the dog um, a stable sit, and then we'll get them used to the handler working at a distance away from them. And we do it just by having that handler move around, maybe go out of sight behind a bush, maybe go up there at a little more distance, do some more activities there, get the dog used to that stuff. Once we get that going on, then you see that it gets a little more complex. And we'll get all the way to the point we're back here behind the brick wall where they can't see us at all, and we move on from there. Now, the other thing that we'll do is we'll get the dog used to seeing activity in front of it that it needs. So, in other words, what we want is when the dog's at an arrest scene, rather than having the dog up and barking all the time and you've got to physically control it, we want a dog calm and stable during the arrest phase while other officers are doing the arresting work. And so while they're doing their police work on this one, we want that dog calm and focused on what's going on. And we start with this. And in the beginning, I'll show you an example. It looks like watching paint dry, but we start at a distance and we work it around, move it in different angles. We maybe bring in a police car with some activity going on it, maybe a little more ruckus. Then the guy tries to take off and run away. And then we have it like that. So when you see it, here's the way it starts. And if you take a look at this video, those who are listening on audio won't hear it, so I'll narrate it. You have two officers approaching somebody up. They're wearing a sleeve. The dog is used to seeing a sleeve. They don't know what's going on. And now the handler is just paying the dog, delivering a treat for calm, focused attention to what's going on in front of him. If we go back, now we'll come back, we'll reset the exercise, have a conversation about what's going to come next. We're going to ask the decoy to go ahead and make a little more ruckus. So we go back up again as we move forward. We approach this person, have a conversation. And now her voice is a little louder. It's a little faster than it was before. And you can skip ahead until you're at the point where now there's a physical interaction between the two of them. And you'll notice the dog is focused on it now. There's less head swiveling than there was before. He's still focused on the decoy. He sees what's going on. We can jump ahead and you see next interaction, we can go all the way down to a kneeled handcuffing exercise. And we want the same thing from the dog where he's calm and focused. So if you do that right, Don, it's like watching paint dry. You want it in the beginning stages to be boring. You want that dog so stable and confident until eventually you can get this till it's right up on top of them and they can see this right on top and they're stable and confident. And then when you give them the cue to go in, they'll go in, do what they have to engage and go out. But most of the time, most of the arrests we get, if we do our job right, we find somebody, the dog's not going to bite them. Other officers are going to be doing the physical work of making the arrest. They're going to search, they're going to handcuff, they're going to take physical control. Our job then is going to be scene security with them. Step back, get the dog calm, get the dog down. And that's one of the things where I think culturally as an entity, the police canine community has to embrace this notion that the most effective dog is the one that's calm and focused, not the one that's out at the end of the leash snarling and jumping around. And you got to physically control, because if you have to physically control your dog, you're no longer a police officer. You're basically just a walking tether block. You are just there tethering that dog and you're a management tool. And you lose your ability to do police work. If you think about it, if all of a sudden that turned into a lethal force encounter and you've got two hands on your dog trying to hold them, you're going to be impaired in your ability to draw your gun. One of the officers that was in that video was involved in a lethal force encounter and was able, with his dog on his left side with one hand, was able to draw with one-handed and fire effectively. So the point I'm making here is that you absolutely need a calm and controlled dog. And that takes work. And it takes work that looks like paint drying, but it pays off in the end.
Thanks, Steve. That's really good. I love the illustrations that you had, and I think that sometime in the future we'll have to get back together and bring some more information that you have to the audience, and so that we can all learn from you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm absolutely excited about the possibility. Thank you very much. I had a great time, Don.